All right, hello everyone. So this video is going to set up what the directions are for our first unit of study together, Unit 6, which is going to be all about the Great Depression and the New Deal. So it does pick up with where we left off after the 1920s. We ended with the stock market crashing, which is one of the causes of the Great Depression to happen. So because this is a new context for learning for us, what I do want to do is establish what our essential questions are, what they mean, what the resources available for this unit are, where they're located on Google Classroom, and then how to access the resources for our first day's lesson. So usually for each lesson that I post, it'll have a much shorter direction video to set up where to find stuff, what you're going to be doing, what the bigger ideas are, and then after that day, I'll post another video of a short debrief on kind of going over the answers that you might have gotten for that lesson. All right, so the point of this one again is to go over the big ideas of the entire unit. And as you can see on your screen right there, you've got all the essential questions. So there's 6 of them for this unit, and notice they're all structured around what happens when there is a crisis in the United States. The Great Depression was a huge economic crisis. Right now, we're living through basically a pandemic, so a medical crisis in the country. So you notice that the essential questions are going to be vague, so you can understand them in terms of the Great Depression in the 1930s and also dealing with the coronavirus in 2020. So let's look at what these are. So we're going to start with what were the factors that caused this crisis to occur. So kind of establishing the context, what caused this thing to happen in the first place. Next up, once that crisis was in place, how did it affect the average American? So did it affect certain groups differently than others? How did Americans respond to this new scenario that they were put into, really not by any choice of theirs? Next up, how did the US federal government respond to the crisis? So the government's in a position to do something about it. What did the government do? So people might be suffering. Did the government step in to help them? Next up, what were the diverse perspectives of what the government actually did? I said this in class and I'll say it again, that across history, no one ever agreed perfectly on whether what was happening were the right choices being made. So you're going to find during the Great Depression, during the coronavirus of today, that people do not agree, they disagree on whether the government's response is appropriate, whether it's too much, whether it's not enough, whether it seems to be working and it's just right, and why did people have those disagreeing ideas on the approach to the crisis. Next up, kind of reaching the end of the crisis. So how did that crisis fundamentally change the United States in terms of its economy, its politics, and its society? And then lastly, the question at the very bottom is the one that you'll be writing about for your axes paragraph, which is exactly the same for this unit. And it says, to what extent was the US federal government's response appropriate to the crisis that the nation faced? Was the response too much? Was it too little? Not enough? Or was it just right? And notice all those previous questions give you a lot of information and details that help you answer that last one. Now, what I'll be clear in all these directions is which numbered essential questions line up with each lesson so that you can see that you kind of spread your work so you get a little bit of each, and you can always get back to that really big essential idea as to why you're doing the work that you are doing. All right. So looking at the end of this unit and what you're going to be expected to do, remember the daily lessons are more or less optional. You choose to do them. I am not grading them. I'm not looking at them unless you ask me to look at them. All right. Here's what your assessments look like. Each of these is worth 50% of your grade, right? One of them is a reading test where you will choose 2 documents from a sort of menu of documents that I will provide to you. You will then, looking at those 2 documents, choose one of the 2, and then do the sourcing, explain the context, do some close reading to provide quotations and explaining what the author actually means, and then corroborate it with that second document you chose, and make sure you annotate that first document to break down how you chose your quotations and how you broke down the meaning. Now, you can either answer those through a set of questions that I will provide to you, or if you're, saying I'm comfortable with this, you can just write it as a paragraph as your own free response. You can explain it in your own words instead of following just a question set. Either one through which you can demonstrate your skills, but it's your choice which one. The rubric for doing that is posted on Google Classroom. I'll preview it for you in just a little bit. And remember, if you're not pleased with your score on that rubric, you can revise your work and resubmit it, and I'll regrade it using the same rubric. And remember, that is the only way to improve your grade when we're doing distance learning, is by revising and resubmitting your work from the assessments. Other 50% of your grade are Axes paragraphs, 1 per unit. Just like before, same format we've done before. I already pointed out which essential question is the prompt. As before, Axes format, doing a thesis, graded on how well you organize it, your use of evidence, how well you analyze the evidence, and how good the grammar and spelling and all those conventions are. The rubric is the same one that was used to grade all your other Axes paragraphs. That is posted on Google Classroom as well. And something kind of new here, if you're not pleased with your score, you can revise the Axes paragraph, resubmit it to be regraded. All right, so we've set up what the big ideas for the unit are, how you're going to be assessed this unit. So let's go ahead and move forward. I want to show you where to access some of this stuff on Google Classroom. So if we were to go to Google Classroom, there it is right there. If you go to the classwork tab right there, you're going to have Unit 6 at the top with the first half of the unit so far. So I don't want someone just jumping in and doing everything in a couple days. I'm going to post the work for this week now and next week at the end of this week. Okay, so don't be too far ahead. If you follow the pacing I suggest, which remember you don't have to, you would do 1 of these per day. Normally in class, we would be doing 2 of these per day. So it's half the speed as before. So when we look at all this stuff, you're going to have a learning guide right there, which you can click on and open. And what you're going to find when you open this up is that it has the essential questions listed. And then much like Google Classroom, it's going to tell you the suggested due dates that I'm giving you, just the number of the unit, the number of the assignment, what the topic of the assignment is, what you're doing in that activity. And then, like I told you before, the essential questions involved, right? You scroll down through that. I made a list for you of all like the really essential content because we're not in class for me to really stress what's super important. There's me telling you, here's the terms that are best to know for each of the different topics. And at the bottom are supplemental links that I'll flesh out as we go through this stuff. So that if you need to get to where do I submit my work, where do I find those rubrics that I was just talking about a minute ago, how do I get to turnitin.com, how do I make an appointment with office hours, it is all right there on this learning guide. So let's pretend for a second that I wanted to know more about those rubrics that I mentioned before. You click on this link, it's going to open up a folder, and it's got these 2 rubrics right here. So I already had them opened. So this is the rubric for your reading assignment. So how well you're doing sourcing, context, close reading, corroboration, and annotation. So notice that A, B, C, D, E, etc. All those are kind of the same sub-skills of the bigger skill. And so it'll be very clear for me to tell you how you're doing on each of those skills in each of these different ways so you know how to improve the different things if you want to revise it. Here's the rubric for the writing. It's the same one we've been using on turnitin.com as before. So notice the 5 major skills I mentioned before, and then these 4 different levels you can earn. Again, these rubrics are available on Google Classroom, right? You get to the folder by going to the distance guide, clicking on that, or else you could be on Google Classroom and the rubrics, did I not post them yet? I have to post them. I'll post them later, but they're in the learning guide for now. Okay, so there's the learning guide. Here's all these future lessons. So let me now move to setting up what is the lesson of your first part of this unit. So moving forward, the first lesson that you're focusing on is watching a video lecture that I recorded all about the causes of the Great Depression. So what we've got set up for you here are what is the essential question that applies to what you're doing in this lesson? And that is, what were the multiple causes that caused this crisis to occur? The really big skill tied with what you're doing in this video lecture lesson is establishing the context for why this crisis occurred in the first place. And what I've included are some guiding questions. So if you really wanted to be doing something while watching the lecture, you could answer those questions as you go through. Those are the types of questions that when you get to the reading test at the end of the unit, that I would ask you to be answering to prove you know how to do contextualization. The key concepts. So what should you really be getting out of this video lecture? You should understand by the end of here that there were multiple causes for the Great Depression. It was not just the stock market crash, even though I know you guys all enjoyed that simulation. Next up, most of these causes were not like happening right away. They were developing slowly over the decades before. And because all these factors were interrelated and they happened all at once, that's why the Great Depression was so bad. If just one of them had happened, we would have had a bad economic situation, but all of them happened and set each other into motion, and that's why it is still the most devastating crisis to ever occur in our entire history. All right, so let me show you how to get to what you need to do there. So what you want to do is, bing, go to Google Classroom, and notice I already showed you that it's got the unit set up there. We already looked at the learning guide. So notice it says Unit 6, Lesson 1. That's the one I'm doing the directions for right now. So you click on that, and the link that is contained in there is a link to Edpuzzle through which you watch the video itself. I also have it posted to my YouTube channel, which you can watch it through there, but I would prefer that you watch it through Edpuzzle, and the reason for that is that it tells me whether you watched it or not. So it gives me an idea of, did you actually watch it? So if you do poorly on the assessment, I can see like, oh, well, maybe they didn't do very well because they didn't actually watch the video they were highly advised to watch at the beginning. So you click on that, it'll open up the video to watch, and you guys have done Edpuzzle before, so you know what to do from there. After you watch the video, click it as done, and you're done with lesson 1. So usually after this, I would go back to the presentation. A different short video would be posted in which I go over the answers of the assignment that I just explained. There's really no answers to go over at this point, right? Because all it takes is understanding what those key concepts are at the very end. All right, so that's it for this one. So watch that video lecture. Remember, contextualization is what you're focusing on, understanding why the Great Depression occurred, and that's going to put you in a good place to move forward with the rest of the unit from here. All right, folks, that's it. I'll see you later. Bye-bye.